Hello everybody, my name's Paul. I started the DiceyReview.com, and tonight we are going to review a game called Imperial Settlers. Now, Imperial Settlers is my favorite game. It is my favorite tabletop game of all time. There's a lot of reasons for that. For some reason, this game just seems to hit the sweet spot for me. It's a civilization building game, which I love those type of games ever since I used to play Sid Meier's and Age of Empires and Red Alert and all those kind of games, all on the PC. This type of game has always really drawn me in. So for some reason, this game is just an absolute perfect fit for me. This is a resource management, card drafting, civ building game where you are trying to get the most victory points. So the goal of the game is to get the most victory points. Once again, a common theme in board games. And there is a victory point track up here. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put the markers down. I forgot to set these up. So we've got the round marker. And there's the barbarians who I am playing tonight. So I'll put that there. Put this round marker right here. So this is the basic player board. There's 4 different factions in the base game. So there's these barbarians right here, as you can see. These boards are double-sided for a male and female character. They have the same stats on both sides. And there are also 3 other civilizations. There's the Japanese, the Egyptians, and the Romans. And each different faction has a little bit of a different special ability, things that they can store in between rounds. Normally you have to get rid of things in between rounds. But the Japanese can store food, the Egyptians can store gold, and the Romans can store raise tokens, which are kind of like your little attack tokens in this game. The barbarians, which are the ones that I will be playing for the purposes of this video, can store extra workers. And they start out with a lot of workers, as you can see up here. They get 5 during their production phases, so they have quite a few workers on hand. And it's nice to be able to store those workers up, because later in the game you can trade those workers for resources or to draw cards. So this is just the basic layout of the game. You can see some cards up here, and you can see some resources up here in the little organizer that I have. So I kind of want to show you, this is just the basic setup for a single player game, and I'm just going to kind of go through some of the mechanics just to show you how the game works were you to play a full 1 to 4 player game. So I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about the setup, and then we will get into the gameplay mechanics and the phases. Alright, so for setup, it is very simple. You're going to take your player board, you're going to set it out in the middle of the table, and you're going to draw 4 cards. Now there's 2 different types of cards in the game. There are your faction cards, which are the cards that are specific to your particular faction. The barbarians each have their own deck, the Japanese, the Egyptians, and the Romans. And then there's also blue-backed common cards that you can see up here on the right of the screen. Now these are the common cards. These are the locations that everyone can build off of, and they will give you different locations that might give you more actions or resources and be very helpful. But essentially what you're going to do is you're going to draw 4 cards, 2 of your faction and 2 of the common locations, and then you are done. That's the setup. After that, everyone will start taking their production phase and their lookout phase to get more cards and their starting resources. So after you've gotten your cards, you are ready to go ahead and start the first phase, which is the lookout phase. So for the lookout phase, you're going to draw more cards. That's essentially what it is. What's going to happen is everyone is going to draw 1 card from their common deck, or from their faction deck, pardon. So we draw 1 more faction card. And then we're going to do a drafting type of process where you will draw cards from the common deck for every player in the game plus 1. So let's say, for instance, we were playing a 2-player game. You would draw 3 common cards from the common deck, place them out in the middle of the table to where everyone can see, and then starting with the first player, that player would get to pick which common card they want, and then it would go clockwise until both players had picked a card, and then the remaining card would get discarded. Then you would repeat the process, but start with the other player that gets to pick first. Now, a variant that I like, that I've heard, I think it's in the rule book, but they also have it on the BGG forums is each player just picks 3 cards, picks 1 card, passes the remaining 2 to the left, and then they get the remaining 2 from the other player's cards that they had looked through, and they pick 1, and then both players discard what card remains after they pick 2. So basically you would draw 3 cards, find a card that you like, something that you think might be good, and then you would go ahead and take the remaining 2 cards, pass it to your opponent, and then you would get 2 cards from your opponent. And just for the sake of saving time, I'm just going to pick this one as if it came from my opponent. Then you would take the remaining card that you have and go ahead and discard it. And then after that, you are ready for the next phase in the game, which is the production phase, and that's where you'll get your resources. So let's talk about that briefly. Alright, so the next step in the game is the production phase, and that's where you're going to get resources. If you look at your player card on the top, what you'll see is that there are a few numbers here. There's going to be different numbers for each civilization, and these are the goods that are produced every production phase for each civilization. So as you can see, the barbarians will produce 5 workers, 1 sword, which is that's the raise token, that's what you use to attack, and then 1 defense token, 1 shield, that's what you can use to defend against attacks. Every civilization is different. You can see, for instance, if you're looking at the Japanese, what they produce every round is 4 workers, 1 raise token, a defense token, and a wood. So they're slightly different than the barbarians. The Egyptians will produce some gold. They'll also produce 3 workers, a raise token, and a shield. And then the Romans are very different in what they will produce. They produce 2 workers, a raise token, stone, wood, and a defense. So they're kind of mixed. They produce a lot of different things. But what you'll do is at the very first of the game, for the first round, you're going to just gather what's listed on your player board as your resources to start the round. So what we would do is we would go grab some of our meeples up here. So I get 5 workers, place those on my board. I get a raise token, and I get a defense token, a shield. After that, we're done. That's our production phase. Now, later in the game, as you build locations up along this top line of the board, this is the production section of your player board. As you expand your locations in your empire, you're going to produce more things, because some location cards are production locations. As you can see, for instance, this card right here is a production location. Every production phase, it produces an extra raise token. So say, for instance, this card was built, and let me find another one. This card right here produces 2 more workers. Let's say that this card was built also. In addition to my starting resources on my location board, I would also get a raise token and 2 more workers every production phase. And you also get these resources when you build the locations initially. So it's nice to build cards like this early in the game to try and build your resource engine. That's the production phase. Now we're going to talk about the main meat of the game, which is the action phase. Alright, so after the production phase, you are ready to move on to the main section of the game, which is the action phase. This is the phase when every player around the table will take turns taking one of a number of available actions and then passing to the player to their left. So what you'll do in the action phase is you can do one of a few different things, and I'm just going to go through the actions and talk a little bit about what they are and how you would complete these certain actions. So the first thing that you can do is you can build a location. Now, when you look at these location cards, you're going to be looking for a few things. You're going to be looking at their cost to build, which is up here in the top left corner. This is the resources. That's where the resources are listed that this building requires to be built and to be put into your empire. Now, this one, for instance, costs a stone and a wood. I don't currently have those resources, but I do have workers that I can trade for resources. So I should be able to build this card eventually if I want to. That's the initial cost to build a location. So if I were able to take the action to trade out for resources that I needed to build this, I could pay the stone and the wood, and then I could put this location in my empire. So let's say, for instance, I had my stone and my wood. What I would do is the stone and the wood would be out here on my player board. I would take those resources and I would put them back at the bank, and then that would pay for this location, and then I would place this location in my empire. Now there's some rules for placing locations in your empire that are important, depending on what type of building you're trying to build. And there's 3 different types of buildings that you can build. There's a production location, which is what this card is. There is a feature location, which is what this card is. And feature locations usually provide one-time benefits. Sometimes they provide benefits if you build a certain color. Every time you build it, you get a benefit. So sometimes they provide ongoing benefits, but for the most part, they provide the one-time benefits. So this one, for instance, says building bonus, 1 victory point, 1 star, for each brown location in your empire. Additionally, draw a card. So this building provides a one-time bonus whenever you build it. The other location that's available to build is the action location. And these are locations that you'll put down, and then you can take actions that are listed on the cards once per round, unless it specifically says you can take it twice. And that'll give you some type of a bonus, usually some kind of victory point or resource. And you can take those actions once per round, unless, once again, like I said, you can. It says that you can take it twice. Some locations let you do that. Now the thing about this is there are placement rules. So like I said, there are 3 types of locations. There are production locations, feature locations, and action locations. And if you look at your player board, you can actually see that up top it says production, in the middle it says feature, and at the bottom it says action. That's telling you where you're needing to place your cards. So you would take, say for instance you're building an action location, you would take your action location and you would place it next to the action space on your player board, and as you build more action locations, they would expand out on the action line down here. Now, say for instance you were building a production location, you would take the production location and you would put it next to the production line on your player board. And as you can see, the types of locations that you build line up with the player board. Now there's another quick thing to mention, is that there are 2 types of cards that you can draw. There are your common locations, which have the blue backs. These can be drawn by everyone and can be accessed by any civilization in the game. There are also the faction locations, and these will have the symbol of your civilization on the back. And they'll also be a different color than the common locations. They may be green or purple or red on the back. And depending on if it's a faction location, which looks like this, it has a little blue line at the bottom, and it also has the different artwork on the back, or if it's a common location, which look like these, which once again you can see there's no blue line at the bottom, and they have blue backs, so they are different. It depends on which side of the board you will place your cards. So faction locations will go to the left side of your board. The placement rules are the same as far as production, feature, and action locations are concerned, but when you are building a faction location, you'll place it on the left side of your board. So for instance, this is a faction feature, so I would place it on the left side of my board next to feature. And in a similar fashion, whenever you are placing the common locations, you'll still place a feature next to the feature line, but you'll place it on the right side of the board. So if you want to remember, when you're building locations, if they're faction locations, they go to the left side of your board. If they are common locations, they go to the right side of your board. And that's the only placement rule as far as which side of the board you will place your cards. So that's the first action that you can do. It's build a location. The next action that you can take is you can make a deal. Now you can only make deals with faction locations, and as I mentioned earlier, faction locations have a blue line on the bottom of the card. What that line is for is that line is showing you what resource you will gain from this location if you wanted to make a deal with it instead of build it in your empire. To make a deal, you simply take 1 food, and the food location or the food resources look like this. They look like little apples. And you can trade, once again, workers for food if you want to. You can trade workers for food, stone, wood, or to draw a card. So if you can manage to get a food in your empire and you have a faction location that you don't necessarily want to build, what you could do is pay a food to the bank, flip your card upside down, and then place it underneath the top of your player board where you see deals right there. And what will happen is you will get the resource immediately when you build it, just like you would if you build a location. So I'll get my extra worker here. And then in every subsequent production phase, you'll also get this resource in addition to the other production resources that you may get from your buildings. So that's how you make a deal. The next action that you can take is you can raise a location to get goods from it. Now you can do one of two things for the raise location action. You can either take one raise token and raise your location to get the resources listed under the raise to gain section on your card, or if there are common locations built by your opponents and you have enough raise tokens, which you need 2 raise tokens to defeat one of your regular enemy's buildings, you need 3 raise tokens to defeat a building that has a shield placed on it, which everyone will have one of these to defend their common locations. So if you have a shield listed, or if you have a shield laid on one of these buildings, it'll take 2 of those raise tokens to defeat one of your enemy buildings. Now, if you are just wanting to raise one of your own cards, there's a couple of stipulations to that. First off, you have to raise your cards while they are in your hand. So you can't, for instance, build a location and then raise your own location for 1 sword or for 2 swords. You have to raise your location from your hand, meaning what you would do is you would take your raise token, you would put it in the bank, discard this card, and immediately gain the resources that are listed in the top right corner. So after discarding this raise token, you would discard this card as well and get 2 wood for that location, which is potentially very helpful if you're needing some more resources to extend your turns during a certain round. And that's the raise location action. The next action that you can take is you can activate an action location. So let's say, for instance, that I had built this action location. This action says spend 1 worker and 1 gold to gain 2 victory points. So say this location was already built in my empire, and I had a gold in addition to all of the workers that I had gathered at the starting round. So what I could do is I could take 1 of my gold, which looks like this, and 1 of my workers, and I would place them on the card like so, and that shows that this action has been taken. And then I would take my point tracker up here on the victory point track and I would move it 2 spaces to show that I had gained 2 victory points. And that's how you activate an action location. Now, as I said, unless a card specifically states otherwise, you can only activate an action once per round. So after this action has been activated, I can no longer do that until we have the cleanup phase at the end of the round and the resources get removed. Now, the last action that's listed in the rule book is trading workers for resources. If you look at the bottom of your player board, you will see a little key that says spend 2 workers to gain a wood, a stone, a food, or to draw a card. Now you can do that if you need to get certain resources to complete an action. For instance, the barbarians start with 5 workers. That's all they get. So they don't start with any stone, they don't start with any wood. They just start with large quantities of people that they can then send out to get wood or get stone or gather food. So as an action, what you could do is you could take your 2 workers, place them in the bank, and say, I'm going to trade these workers for any of the resources listed at the bottom of your player board. And that's the last action that you could take. Now the last phase is the cleanup phase. This happens after everyone has taken their actions around the table, and there are no more actions left to take, or everyone has passed. What you would do is you would take any resources that you can't store between rounds. Say, for instance, the barbarians, they can store any number of workers that they want in between rounds. But these raise tokens and this defense token, I can't store. So if I haven't used these in the round, I would have to discard them, and I wouldn't be able to use them if I had already passed. or if I didn't have the cards to raise or a card to defend. So I would just discard these cards as part of my cleanup phase. Now let's say, for instance, that I also had gold that I hadn't spent, and it was still on my player board. This gold would get put back in the bank as well, because it's not a resource that I can store between rounds. But say, for instance, I had these 5 workers that I hadn't used, I could store these 5 workers on my player board in between the cleanup phase and the next round, and I wouldn't have to discard them. So at the start of the next round, I would draw 5 more workers and have a total of 10. So that's one nice thing with each civilization. They have a certain type of resource that they can store in between rounds that they don't have to discard. And that's the cleanup phase. After the cleanup phase is complete, you pass the first player token, the player to your left, and then you start the process all over again. You have another lookout phase, you have another production phase, you have more actions until you reach 5 total rounds. And at the end of the 5th round, the points are tallied and everyone scores and sees who wins. Common locations are worth 1 victory point, faction locations are worth 2 victory points, and you can also take actions like this to increase your victory points during the game to try and get the most points possible to win and be the most successful settler. Now the last thing I thought I would do is go through kind of a mock round to show you a little bit of how the game is played and how the actions might take place and what thought process you might use when taking actions and building locations. There's a solo variant in this game that is included in the rulebook, and there's actually a solo deck that's included that you will play against, kind of like an AI player, and you just try and get victory points, and it's one of the best solitaire modes, if not the best solo variant that I've played in tabletop games, period. It's a very deep mode, and it's actually there's actually been a free campaign variant released by the designer Ignacy Trzewiczek that is free to download, print off, and it includes a campaign mode essentially for the solo variant of the game and adds just crazy amounts of depth and replayability to the solo variant as well. So what I'm going to do is kind of play the game like I would normally with the solo variant, and I'll just explain that, you know, which actions I'm taking and when it would pass and things like that, so you kind of see how the rounds go. So we've got our starting resources as the barbarians. We have our 5 workers, we have a raise token, and we have a defense token. We also have our starting cards. Now, if you remember, to start the game, we drew 2 common locations, which once again you can tell by the blue back and the fact that there's no deal to be made on the bottom. And we draw 2 faction locations, which are different color on the back, have the civilization symbol, and have the make a deal line at the bottom. These were our 2 starting cards. After that, we had the lookout phase, which meant that we drew 1 more faction card, and we drew and drafted 2 total common cards for a starting hand of 7 cards. So, what we can now do is begin to look at the different locations that we have available for purchase to build in our empire, and we can start to see if we want to build any of them. So right off the bat, I see one that's attractive to me because I like to have as many workers as I possibly can, and I like to try and build production locations early so that I can get an engine going and have plenty of resources in later rounds. So what I'm going to try and do is build this location, the town, so that I can get 2 workers initially and then 2 workers in any subsequent production phases. So what I have to do is I have to be able to get a stone and a wood to build this location. So my first action would be, I'm going to take these 2 workers, place them in the bank. I'm going to grab a wood. So I have my wood, and this is my action. If I was playing with more than 1 person, I would then pass the turn to the player to my left, and they would take an action. And then I wouldn't be able to take an action until it got back to my side of the table. But, since we are playing the solo variant, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take another action where I trade workers to get resources. So I would say I'm going to take these 2 workers, I'm going to place them in the bank, and I'm going to get a stone. That's my action. The turn would then pass once again to the player to my left. Now when it gets back to me, I now have enough to build a location. I have a stone and I have a wood. So what I would do is I would place those resources in the bank, and then since this is a common location, it goes on the right side of my player board. And since it's a production location, it goes next to the production line at the top. Now what happens is I instantly gain my 2 resources, which are 2 workers. I place them on my player board, and that once again is my turn because I've taken an action to build a location. Now when it comes back to me, I now have 2 more workers that I can use to build locations, and I have some more options as to what I might want to build. Now there are a lot of different cards that I have drawn that might be useful, but I think I might want to be able to raise some opponents' locations, and to do that I'm going to need to get some more raise tokens. This one produces a raise token every round, which would give me enough raise tokens to defeat one of my enemy locations. Now I don't think I have enough workers, since I only have 3, to trade to get the 2 resources that I need. So I think I'm going to have to raise one of my locations. Now I don't want to raise this location because this is an action that could provide a lot of victory points to me in the game. But this one-time brown location, I don't know that it's going to do too much good for me early in the game. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my raise token, I'm going to discard it, and I'm going to get 2 wood for this card after I discard this card as well. And I've just taken a raise action. So I get these 2 wood, place them in my player board, and that's my turn, and once again it would pass to the player to my left. Now when it gets back to my turn, I now only need 1 stone to build this location. So what I would do is I would take these 2 workers, trade them into the bank, and then I would get to draw a stone. And that would be my action. So now that the turn has come back around to me, I can build this location by paying 1 stone and 1 wood to the bank. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And since this is once again a common card, it goes to the right of the board. And since it's a production, it stacks out here to the right of my other production location. So as you can see, as you lay down cards, your civilization starts to expand and become bigger and bigger the more actions that you take. Now, I only have a worker and a wood left as my resource. I have a defense token, but that's not necessarily going to be able to build me any new locations. It'll be able to defend these locations should they get attacked. But right now I'm looking for an early way to expand my empire. Now I don't have enough to build anything really except for this location. And I think I may try and build this location just to get get my first faction location on the board. And this is actually an action that has an interesting ability. It says that I can spend 1 worker to choose 1 enemy location and gain 1 of the goods shown in the raise field, and I can activate this twice. So what I think I'm going to do is, instead of focusing on this location that produces raise tokens every round, and I would have gotten a raise token whenever I place this location down, but just for an example, I'm going to go ahead and say that I'm going to build this instead of get the raise token and go that route. Because this kind of does what the raise tokens do as an action, and I don't have to destroy enemy locations to get the goods. I can just send workers to get the goods for me. So what I'll do is I will pay the goods listed on this card. Now for some faction locations, you're going to see a house down here at the bottom in the cost to build. That means that I have to destroy one of the locations in my empire to pay a foundation to build this card. So what I would have to do is I would pay my wood, which I have here on my player board, and that would meet the requirements of part of the card, but then I would also have to discard one of these cards, and I think I'm going to discard this one. And that would provide the foundation I needed to build this location. And this is an action, so I would put it down here in my faction side on the action line of my player board. And that would be what would be required to build one of the faction locations should they show this house symbol in the top left. Now, I could do one of two things to end the round. I could either send one of my workers to gain a good that is listed in one of my enemies' raise field locations. So, for instance, if one of my opponents had built a card that had a raise to gain field, I could send one worker to gain either the victory point or the gold. But I can also store workers in between rounds. So what I think I'm going to do is end this round, store this worker, and I would pass. And then it would be the cleanup phase. I would get rid of the defense token. The first player marker would pass to the player to the left, and then we would start all over and start round 2. Now, this wasn't a very efficient round for me. I was just trying to give some examples. But this is kind of how the game is played. And once again, whoever has the most victory points at the end of the game after all 5 rounds are over wins the game and becomes the most powerful settler. This is Imperial Settlers. This is my favorite game. This is a game that I can't get enough of. I started in the tabletop hobby about a little over a year ago, almost a year and a half. This is one of the first games that I bought. It got its hooks into me early, and it just hasn't let go. I love this system. I love the mechanics. I love how you build your locations and your civilization grows. I love the theming, the artwork. Everything about this game to me is absolutely perfect, and I can't wait to get it to the table whenever somebody suggests it. I'll probably make a thoughts video of why I like this game so much and just go through a little bit of the mechanics and talk a little bit about why it's my favorite game. But this has been the how to play portion of the video, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me at thedicey@gmail.com. You can also log on to my blog and leave comments there, and I'll answer those as quickly as I can. So, I hope you've enjoyed the video, and until next time, I'll see you at the table.